evening. Okay, we are going to go ahead and get started. It is 5 p.m. and I call to order the April 1st, 2025 Board of Trustees Workshop and Business Meeting. Do I hear a motion to begin the workshop and business meeting?
Madam Chair, I move we begin the workshop and the business meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Shealy. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And the motion carries. The district is in compliance with the South Carolina Freedom of Information Act by notifying the media of the date, time, and place of the meeting. The district tapes the meeting for accuracy in preparing the minutes. I now yield the floor to Mr. Nick Pizzuti.
Madam Chair, fellow board members, staff, and guests, please rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing for a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Do I hear a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
Madam Chair, I move we approve the agenda as presented.
Thank you, Ms. Shealy. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And the motion carries. Okay, we are going to jump right on into our budget workshop, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Price.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the board. Tonight, we have a first glance for the 25-26 budget. So please know that everything that we're sharing with you tonight with regards to revenues and expenses, they're all very preliminary numbers. As you know, the final state budget will not be approved until later on this school year, most likely in June. But this is the first glance at what we've come up with regards to projections, as well as identifying our new funded items that we will need to consider moving forward. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Miller and her team, who have done an awful lot of work in trying to pull together, thank you, Ms. Ruth, information to help us with our decision-making process. So Ms. Miller, I'll turn it over to you for the introduction.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Price, and good evening, Chairwoman Kathy Henson, Superintendent Dr. Postaway, and board members. I do want to thank my team who is over there for all their hard work on the budget. Definitely cannot do this alone. The senior leadership team, along with many departments, really get involved in this. And I know we're working on pulling up a document. Everyone should have this document already. There's a file that they're going to be pulling up that I'm going to talk about. Does everybody have a hard copy of the PDF file? Yes, it'll be this one right here. We're going to go ahead and start talking about this file while they're working on getting that pulled up for us. We really have taken a good look at where we are in fiscal year 25 and where we think we're going to end up at June 30th. As I mentioned last month, there is some additional revenue that I do anticipate we will be collecting, which means that's good news. It'll be reoccurring revenue. So we have built that into our fiscal year 26 projections. And then also just looking at expenditures, and we talked about the payroll last month and about the two key components there that we are going to help tailor in that projection for that as well, and we're building that into the projection. As you can see on your slide, the PDF file, we're starting at the top looking at our fiscal year 25 revenue, which is the $367,948,521. So that is what we budgeted originally for fiscal year 25. And so what we're adding to that is a row for local revenue increased in projections, which is approximately $8 million. And then we're also adding a state revenue increase of about $762,000. Now, both of those numbers are fluid, and they most likely will not come exactly in at those amounts. But based on the information we have at this time, that is what we're projecting. So that'll bring our reoccurring revenue from fiscal year 24 of $376 million. We're going to take that number, and then we are going to look at where do we think revenue is going to come in for fiscal year 26. And so, as Dr. Price mentioned, these are very preliminary figures. This is using the information that's available at this time, but we are projecting that we will have close to $6 million more of local tax revenue. And then we are also projecting that the state revenue will be $7.7 million more. So that's a total increase of $13.6 million in revenue. So if you take our adjusted fiscal year 25 projection plus that new money, and the current or the projected revenue then is $390 million. So that's good news. That's reoccurring money. We feel comfortable in using that as our base revenue figure. Now, keep in mind that is using the state's House Ways and Means revenue projection. That number is going to change, and we probably won't know until next May what it really is going to be because we still don't have this year's final figure. But we do feel that's a good number to build our budget off of. So moving down under the expenditures, you can see that we're starting with the base salary and benefit budget for fiscal year 25. That is the amount that to keep the current employees we have at the current pay rate that we would need to budget. So taking that number and reducing that from the revenue shows that we have approximately $43 million left that we can use to budget. So starting on the next row, you can see our fiscal year 25 accounts payable budget of approximately $45.8 million. That is, again, just to keep the expenses that we currently have, no adjustment for any cost of living increase or inflation or any changes. And you can see there we quickly use up that amount and actually go to a negative amount. So we've already taken our new money and we've reduced that and used that up, but don't panic. As we talked about our salary projections, we are making that change to adjust for that. So we do feel comfortable adjusting and reducing expenditure budget by approximately $16 million. So that brings us down to the third row in the expenditures there with a cumulative amount available of $13.9 million. And then our senior leadership team has worked very hard going through the budgets and trying to find some cost savings. They did identify approximately $776,000. So if you add that to that number above, that means we have approximately $14.7 million available for new expenditure requests for fiscal year 26. Are there any questions before I move on from that? Everyone's able to follow the math, and I do want to say thank you to Libby working with me on the budget and making sure that it would be easy to understand, because this was not my first round at this, because my brain works differently than educational brains, and so my math brain was a little different, so hopefully everybody can follow that, and you can thank Libby for that, not me. All right. Going back to the presentation, just going to do a couple recaps for you because I know I went through that quickly. I'll just go ahead and start talking about it while they work on getting the slide that we're going to talk about. I have a bar graph in the slides that just shows what our fiscal year 27 or our fiscal year 25 projected revenue, the updated projections, that's what's in the purple bars there. And then you can see our preliminary projection, which is in my favorite color, teal. And so that's where to the far right, you can see that $390 million. That's where we think the fiscal year 26 revenue projection should be. And then just a quick recap, that is a $13.6 million increase from the projected, updated projections for fiscal year 25. All right, moving on to expenditures. We have 8 boxes up here that are strategically color-coded to your detail and breakout of our budget requests. I'm not going to read through all of these and give you the dollar amounts. You guys can see that. But we do start at the top left there with federal mandates, moving over to state mandates. We still have a little bit of the ESSER funding that bailed us out this last year, but so we've got to make up for that this fiscal year coming up. Moving on to our fixed costs, things that we already have in place that we want to continue providing. And then you move to the center box there, what we're used to with our Lexington 1 standards, and we want to continue to provide that same quality. Followed to the right there, you have your salary study committee's recommendations. And then on the bottom row, we have our would like to do items, followed by a category titled other requests. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Price to give you more information.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Miller. So what Mrs. Miller and her team, along with other members of the senior leadership team, have worked to do is to try to identify any additional or increase in costs that are going to be facing the district for the new school year. And then we've categorized those things and have attached our best estimate for dollar value amounts to go with each one. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go through the different categories so that you all can see the specific items that have been mentioned and listed. And then we'll go back to that spreadsheet that Ms. Miller used with her introduction to look at dollar amounts and how that impacts our available funds. So the first category are the items that are identified as federal mandates. These are things that we're required to do by federal regulations in order for us to remain in compliance. At our last board meeting, there was a request to align the budget request items with our strategic plan. If you look at the column on the left-hand side, you will see how each item connects with the strategic plan, strategy, and goal. So that's been laid out for you. Now, I could go through every single item, but some of these are self-explanatory. So I don't want to do that, but I want to pause on each category to give anyone a chance to ask for a clarification if that's necessary. So at this time, I will leave this here, and if there are any questions about the federal mandated items, now would be a time to ask those. And if I don't know the answer to the question specifically about an item, we've got members here that will be able to help us with those.
Dr. Price.
Yes, sir.
So the federal mandates, obviously these are things that the federal government requires us to do. Are these funded mandates, or are these mandates we have to fund to meet that federal law?
There's a combination of some funding that comes with it, but others that we're required to pick up the cost.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Price, so it sounds like, or it looks like positions are on here. So we're adding additional positions because there's additional need within the district, essentially?
That's correct. When you see something like American Sign Language interpreter, psychologist, special education FTE increase, there are regulations and guidelines that say you have to have so many teachers for so many students. And so in order to respond to the need, we have to build these into our budget. See, the interesting thing is we are funded at a state level based on the number of students that we have in our school district. But then we have to look at the individual needs of those students who may require more, and then we have to plan accordingly. Okay, moving on.
And so with
Okay.
these mandates,
Yes.
even though we haven't, we'll add them into our budget because they're federal mandates. But are we already hiring for these positions?
I will defer to Mrs.
Hey, board,
Price.
if you're not talking, can you turn?
Mrs. Price, do you want to respond specifically to some of the ones that are on this page about currently advertising?
We are going to speak to that a little bit later tonight, but we would love to start hiring for those positions as soon as possible. But many of these we will not have a choice but to hire for them because they are mandated by law that we hire for. By IEPs and 504 teams and others, we will not have a choice but to go ahead and hire. Some of them we'll talk with you a little bit later. We would like permission to move forward with tonight because if we don't, we're going to miss some prime opportunities for teachers. So, but some of them, yes, we will have to hire now by law.
You just said we may talk about this tonight, but with adding these FTEs, are we going to have to move FTEs from other locations or lose them possibly? Or are these just extra FTEs?
These are in addition to the ones that we already have filled. Because the needs are increasing, we have to add these positions to be able to serve those needs. Okay. All right, the next are items that are connected to state mandates or regulations. So you'll see this list is a little bit shorter, but the dollar amount goes up. And the largest item here is the step increase for all employees. We have to factor that into our budget for the next year. And I'll open it up to any questions that folks may have about items for state mandates.
So Dr. Price, same question. I guess I'll ask it in a little different light. These are mandates from the state. Are they all funded, or do we have to, I guess, pretty much budget for meeting those mandates? And if we have to meet it, do you know a rough percentage as to how much is funded by the state versus how much is funded by the district?
So part of this is considered in the allocation that we receive from the state, but specifically not as much. They have factors that they use to determine the amount of funds that we receive from our state allocation, and then we have to plan accordingly. So you see items on here such as a 5K instructional assistant. Well, when we add a kindergarten class, we have to add a kindergarten assistant to go with that class. So in looking at the needs that we have forecasting ahead, we know that we're going to have to add additional kindergarten instructional assistants.
With the step increases for all employees, do we have data on actually how much that increases each year? Because in my head, I'm thinking, so we've got everyone here. If everyone jumps up a step and all employees stay the same, then that would be an increase. But I feel like we've got 20, 30-year employees that are retiring and new people coming in. So is it really that big of an increase?
This is not only the step increase, but usually the salaries go up as well. So the dollar amount attached to the step increases every year.
So salary increase.
It goes hand in hand. Lindsay Price worked really hard on calculating those numbers for us and how that impacts. As far as an average of year to year, I don't know that, but that's something we may be able to work on and get for you.
Is that step increase based on what is proposed right now, or is that a solid number? Or is that going to be fluid when they finish the budget?
So you'll notice it's probably shaded purple on your printout, and that is because it's fluid. Depending on which direction we go and which plan we go with, those amounts are the ones that will change depending on that. So right now they are based on the projection that is in the salary committee's suggestion, and so they would change if we did not go with those. Based on the House Ways and Means Committee amounts.
So that's taking away that one column as well, isn't that in the budget? Or their budget, where they remove one of the columns of the...
Oh, the bachelor's plus 18?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's been factored into this.
Okay.
Yes.
So the step increase is in here as a state mandate, but technically we already meet that for our salaries, our minimum.
For our current salary scale.
Right.
But for a future salary scale, another years of experience for a step, we would have to factor in those additional costs. So if you take that and multiply it across all of the number of employees that we have, that's how we get the estimated value for what that's going to cost the district.
Just want to remind Rick, in case some people may not know, the South Carolina law mandates a step increase for teachers. So we have to do that as part of the South Carolina law.
For another year's experience.
That's for teachers, but not all employees as we reflect here. Okay.
That's correct. In years past, the way it's always worked with us was each year you got your step increase plus whatever increase was allowed or approved by the board. And there have been years that support staff did not get an increase. You know, those were not famous years, to put it politely, but it has happened.
And I think an objective each year is that if we give increases, we give them to all of our employees and find a way to build that in. That was actually one of the recommendations that the Salary Study Committee listed, was that if we do a raise for some, we do a raise for all. So it may not be an equivalent raise, but trying to make sure that we take that into consideration for future planning.
And our board policy requires that we give the step for those with 152 or more days. So that kind of, it's not state mandated for the others, but it is board policy.
So that's a good example of a Lexington 1 standard that's driven by either policy or practice. Okay. Any other questions about the state items? All right. The next category gets into fixed costs, or things that we may refer to as the cost of doing business. Now, some of these things that have been part of our normal operations, as the increases go up for doing business, we have to accommodate and account for that. So there's an example right there of the first item, the software cost for frontline Medicaid billing. That's the software that our nurses use to file for the services that they provide so that they can get a reimbursement from Medicaid. That software has been purchased and funded by ESSER funds up to this point, and so that cliff has passed now, and so we've got to work that into our operating budget to account for that. The remaining items in green are items that are part of our regular operations, and we're anticipating an increase in those costs. So, for an example, you see ambulance coverage for athletics increase. They're going to raise their rates for what they're charging us. Substitutes increase in costs. We're having really good success with filling more of our teacher vacancies with substitutes. So when our fill rate is higher, our bill is going to be higher, and so we have to account for that. You see other things like school resource officers and the billing that we receive from county and town. When that goes up, we have to account for that. So these are our fixed costs, the cost of doing business, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have about items on this page.
So what I'm hearing from you is the substitute increase in cost, that cost is still giving us good return on investment as opposed to us managing our substitutes in-house.
Correct. I believe over the past 3 years, and Mrs. Price can correct me if I'm wrong, but 2 years ago we were looking at around a 67% fill rate on substitute classrooms, and a lot of that had to do with coming out of the pandemic. And then last year we were just over 80%, and now this year we're getting really close to 90%. I believe it's just over 87%, but Mrs. Price can correct me if I'm wrong there.
Correct. We were at 69% in 22-23. We were at 81.68% in 23-24. And so, of course, 24-25 is not over yet, but that rate has varied this year between, in the high 80s. So we're hopeful for what that's going to look like, and that's with an increased absentee rate. So even the percentage percentage has been a higher fill rate even with an increased absentee rate.
And that's more than, say, like 2019 pre-COVID?
It's hard to collect the data back to compare apples to apples, but yes.
Do we have a uniform plan for covering those classrooms that we don't get a substitute for?
We do, yes.
Can we know what that is?
Yes. Each school has a plan at the elementary, middle, and high, and their level directors work with them on that to make sure that's consistent among elementary, middle, and high. But we also, if for some reason a substitute can't be found, they have a plan for that, and teachers are paid to cover if they cannot find a substitute in the building. Mm-hmm.
This may have been something approved before, but can someone explain what the South Lake Elementary School technology budget is?
We can. I believe either Clark or Derek may be able to help us with that, but I believe that we had startup costs for their technology needs built into the bond referendum and the construction bid that went into opening up year one. And now that those funds have been exhausted, we have to add those into our operating budget to sustain them, just like we do every other site. But I'll turn it over to Mr. Berry to add or clarify that.
Yes, sir. That's exactly correct. Hit the on button. We're in technology. Thank you for having me. Yes, that technology cost is a part of repairs. If something breaks in the classroom, then we have a little bit of money to repair that, is like a camera or so. It also covers the amount of internet and phone service that is coming into the building. So if there's long distance calls, calling parents, all of that phone service is covered inside of that communication budget. That was covered by the bond previously. We need to put it in a general fund because it's now a new school.
Mr. Berry, do you know roughly what that amount is?
Yes, sir.
For elementary schools, it's normally, what is that number? It's 30 total.
Oh, here. Okay.
$8,000 line item.
Right.
Thank you.
So I'm assuming the rest of, like, every school's other technology budgets and that original number up top these are all the new stuff.
Right. All of those are recurring. This will be a new ad, so we wanted to account for it. Okay. Any other questions for that slide? Okay, moving on. The next category is what we referred to earlier as our Lexington 1 standards. These are the things that are established by our current practices or procedures or policy. So you'll see here things that are part of our standard operating procedures. And so these items are things such as replenishing our FTE position pool. You know that we pull from that whenever needs arise throughout the year that we identify. And so after we've depleted that, this is an opportunity to get that replenished to full capacity. You'll see things like a school counselor, social worker, a plumber. Mr. Cooper was educating us with our 33 school sites. How many plumbers do we have to help us operate all 33 sites?
Currently 3.
3. So the demand is leading us to, in order to keep the standard that we've established as far as operations and quick turnaround on repairs that may be needed, the demand is calling for an additional plumber. So you see other items that are listed there. Again, I don't want to dive into too many specifically in case you have some specific questions about any that you'd like to get clarification on.
Question about the general ed FTE position pool and special ed FTE position pool. What's the reasoning behind those two?
Okay, I believe that throughout the year we have used some of the positions that have been allocated to the pool, and so now when we look to begin a new year, we want to replenish that pool, so we'll have those available. And I believe the request is to add 10 positions back to those pool as identified needs arise. And I'll turn over to Mrs. Price to add any more to that explanation.
That is correct, and even 10 makes me a little nervous that will not be enough because we have probably spent more than that already this year. As situations arise during the year, a great example of that for the general ed pool would be the beginning of the year we were able to add new kindergarten classes and IAs as the enrollment was a little bit higher than we had expected at the beginning of the year. You never know how many kindergartners are going to come at back to school time. It's your best guess, right? So it's nice to have that situation where you can add. We added a middle school teacher where that classroom was a little bit high. You know, it's situations like that when you never know what's going to be, what the situations are going to be. Special education is a definite need as students arrive and as needs arrive throughout the year in IEPs and 504s. You need to have a place where you can take FTE from, where you can hire the one-to-ones or any of those positions that, come as they're going to come as the year evolves. And even with 10, I start to feel a little worried about that because I know that we just know that that's going to happen throughout the year. And I want to make sure our students have exactly what they need. And even 10, I'm not sure that will hold us through the year, but we'll take that as it comes. And this year we've been able to cover that a little bit more with vacancies because we had that little bit of gap in the fill rate. We know we're tightening that up a little bit next year, as Ms. Miller's going to talk about. She's shaking her head. So I panic a little bit about that because we won't have that little bit of a vacancy gap to cover that. But we'll hold tight and hope that that's going to work out fine. But you need those positions to be able to make sure that your classrooms aren't too big, that you have the needs available for students as they come throughout the year, because they're going to come.
Thank you. Ms. Price, are those positions do you ask for those every year or?
Yeah, because like that one-to-one is not going to go away, probably not going to go away for that student, as an example. If the student stays with us, probabilities are they're going to keep that one-to-one. I mean, they may not, but if they go from second grade to third grade, they're going to keep that one-to-one with them to go from second grade to third grade. So that one-to-one would then just roll up with that student to third grade. So I still need it the next year. So I can't give it back to the budget for the next year. So it stays and rolls up. So then I still need, that pool the next year.
Okay.
If we do give it back, you would see it in the budget. So for example, I think in my presentation a couple of times before you saw I gave back like 2 high enrollment IAs. Mm-hmm. That was for those schools that particular year had a little bit of increase in enrollment in kindergarten. They didn't want to hire a teacher at that point. It was a little bit too late. So we offered them 2 IAs as an example. Those IAs wouldn't roll up to first grade because we would just make room for that the next year with a first grade teacher. So we gave those back to the budget and found other opportunities for those IA teachers. So when we can give it back to the budget, we do, but in general, they usually roll up in the budget.
And, do you ask for 10 every year, or do you?
We try with 10 in the past. We've tried for 10 and had to cut down sometimes before, and we've tried to use vacancies to supplement that. So tightening up that vacancy percentage, which we're getting ready to talk about, we're going to try to start with 10 again and hope that will last us.
Well, I'm just saying, if you need to ask for more, ask for more.
Yeah. I'll keep that in mind.
Mr. Cowan, you may recall, too, that in one of Mrs. Miller's original slides on that spreadsheet, there was an item where I believe it was called cost savings that it equaled to about $770,000 we were reintroducing into the operating budget to be reallocated for other needs. That's an example of when Ms. Price gives positions back to the budget to be reallocated for something else.
Dr. Price, one last question in this section. Required employee onboarding expenditures, does that cost fluctuate based on how many new employees we have, or is that a fixed cost as far as the HR representatives that are their coach and guide that we heard about? Or
it's a tricky number, and
okay.
It's probably a year to year. Mrs. Price lives in this world along with Ms. Freeman a lot more regularly than I do. But the expenses that go along with that, it may fluctuate from year to year, and so the additional expense that we're expecting for the upcoming year is what's reflected in this year's request.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Explain the extracurricular supplement growth.
Okay. I believe, and Mrs. Price can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but as we continue to add programs and opportunities for students to be engaged in with regards to extracurriculars, team sports, clubs, and those kinds of things, as we offer supplements for the sponsors and coaches that go along with that, as we add programs, we have to budget to build in the supplement for the coach or the sponsor.
That is correct. And so we try to just add a bucket to that each year so that we make sure that that is there. It could be yearbook, it could be archery, it could be whatever the supplements that we offer are. We just try to make sure that there is a bucket there so that if any additional programs become available, that we have the supplements there to support that. And I'm trying to think off the top of my head, this past year, lacrosse at Gilbert was an example this past year. Robotics was an example this past year. So we just try to make sure, high schools, different schools are adding throughout the year. You know, in the past, some elementary schools used to have like PTAs that did their yearbook, and now they're switching, and now they're doing it, you know, in the schools, and a teacher might be doing it. So different things happen throughout the year that we just need to make sure there's funds there available that schools are able to have available for employees to be able to be paid for those services.
So, and that would include like assistant basketball coaches for like middle school. Okay. I think I had asked for like a list maybe of what we're paying. Maybe that was online. Maybe someone said that was online. Anyway, I'll have to go look for it, I guess. But
Yes.
I am curious because, I mean, I know firsthand how much time it takes, and I know a lot of these coaches don't do it for the money, obviously, because I think they get paid like $400 or $500 for the whole season, which is crazy. I wish we could just up that a little bit, because I see how much time they devote. And anyway, I just would like to know what we are paying them.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Mrs. Price, but this year's efforts for the salary study committee was looking at salaries, but I believe there's an intent to look at supplements moving forward. So
That's correct.
that'll be in the future.
That is our plan.
Okay. All right. Moving on to the next group. Now that we've gone through the must-do things and the Lexington One standard things, now we're starting to get to the we would like to do things. So what you see here is a collection of all of the requests that came out of the Salary Study Committee's work. And we listed that as one of the board's budget assumptions, is that we wanted to try to incorporate the work and the recommendations of the Salary Study Committee. And so that's what you have here. Again, Mrs. Miller and Mrs. Lindsay Price have worked really hard to attach dollar amounts and values to each of these things that were presented, I believe, back in January. But the first item on the list is going to need some explanation. So back during that time, we had just gotten the recommendations from the governor and the state superintendent where they wanted to have a $3,000 increase to the beginning level salaries of teachers. So the Salary Study Committee and Mrs. Miller and her team began working on projections of what that would cost us for a $3,000 increase to the starting salary. Now, in addition to that, there were a couple of other recommendations from the Salary Study Committee. Number one was to maintain a $2,000 cushion between the state's minimum starting level salary and ours. So right now, the state's is $47,000 per year for a beginning teacher with a bachelor's degree. If that were to increase to 50, then ours would have moved to 52. Since that time, the House Ways and Means have said, no, we're not ready to go 3,000. We're going to do 1,500. Okay? So the estimates that you see on this slide and in the spreadsheet are sticking with the 52. If the House Ways and Means recommendation stands, then the only thing they're going to be funding us for would be a $1,500 increase to that starting salary, not a $3,000. So we would have to make up the difference. One of the other things that the Salary Study Committee recommended was the differential in amounts for a step of experience. Remember, one year it may be significant, and the next year it may seem like peanuts. And the Salary Study Committee recommended that it be more consistent. And so, correct me if I'm wrong, Mrs. Freeman, but I believe in years 1 through 5, all certified teachers would see a 1.6% increase, 1.5%, thank you, 1.5% increase for the first 5 years of experience, and then every year after that it would be a 1.1% increase. Correct?
Correct.
Correct, thank you. So, and then that would keep a consistent increment for step increase every year for all of our certified employees. And we could do that if we raised the salary to $52,000. If we only went with a $1,500 increase to starting salary, we wouldn't be able to balance the increments and the steps. With only a $1,500 increase, you may recall that there were maybe 3 cells if we went to 52 that everybody would receive an increase over what this year's scale suggests other than people who fell into these three categories based on their level of education and their number of years of experience. And we said we could hold those folks harmless. But if we only do a $1,500 increase, there's going to be so many sales that wouldn't experience that increase that it would be really, really difficult to hold harmless. So if we went with only a $1,500 increase, then we couldn't do that part of the salary studies recommendation. No decision has to be made tonight. We'll look to see what the Senate brings forward as Senate Finance Committee comes out with their recommendations and follow this very closely. The thing that we'll have to keep in mind is, do we want to go to 52 or do we want to stay with 50 to keep that cushion with the state minimum? If we go up to 52, that's more money we're going to be responsible for. And Mrs. Miller, I hate to put you on the spot. Do you remember what the cost differential was if we went with a $1,500 increase versus a $3,000 increase?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It is $3,109,008.
So if we only went with a $1,500, it would reduce our overall operating budget projection for next year by that amount.
Do our friends at the State House have any idea what the Senate is planning?
I have not heard any projections. I don't even know that the Senate has begun discussions on this part of the budget, but I believe that's supposed to be happening here really soon. As we hear of things, as we move forward, the different iterations of the budget reading, we'll keep you informed of what we're hearing, unless you've heard something.
No, that's why I was asking, because I actually follow it very well, because a lot of what I do outside of school board is kind of based on the same type stuff, and I haven't as well, so that's why I was.
Once they begin having conversations,
yeah, I think they were
we'll
still
start to get those
subcommittee
updates.
at subcommittee level this week, and last week they started working on proviso, so it's supposed to start very soon.
Correct.
Ms. Price, I know contracts are due May 10th, but when do they get sent out in April?
So we're going to send them out April 25th, I believe, is the... Yep.
So after our next meeting.
Yes.
The reason I'm asking this is because we've had discussions in the past for this upcoming year to basically be able to say to our people, we're guaranteeing this as a minimum salary, so that they know minimum what they're getting paid before they sign their contracts. That would be huge. It's something that we've never done before. And so this decision would have to be made, the $1,500 versus the $3,000, before we could say something like that.
Correct. We could mention what a minimum salary would be. We could certainly do that, but as far as what it could be, we won't be able to communicate until this is finalized.
So, like, we could say minimum would be $1,500.
Correct. If that's the will of the board, we could do that. You know, technically, by the letter of the law, we could quote this year's salary scale and say it would, at a minimum, be this. And then any additions to this would be based upon the approval of the budget at the state level. But if it's our board's wish to go ahead and commit to a minimum of $1,500, then that's something that we could begin to communicate in that way.
So that decision would need to be made at our next meeting, April 22nd.
I think it would be good to have a direction from the board.
Okay.
We can't vote on it until final, but that could certainly be something that we could get a direction from the board on.
Madam Chair.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so certified salary schedule Lexington 1 increases. I'm looking at
52,000.
this first one right here, 52,000. On our information that we have, I'm seeing that that's going to cost us about $7.6 million.
Yes, ma'am.
If we were to choose to move to that number, that is what we were projecting it would cost us at 100% fill rate.
In that $16 million adjustment at the top, we've already taken that allowance gap percentage, which is about 4%. We've already taken that into account. So that number is the whole, but the offset is up in that $16 million. So it's at 96%.
And that includes the that 7.6 is just to move us to that minimum, or just to move us to that minimum plus fixing the scale that
That
we've
would do both.
previously talked about?
That would get us over the minimum. If the state only raised it 1,500 and we went to 3, then we would be establishing a $3,500 cushion for a starting teacher salary rather than a $2,000 starting cushion. And it would also give us the ability to address the step increases throughout the entire certified teaching scale. Yes, ma'am.
Obviously,
So is it inappropriate to ask that we do that sooner? Board?
Well, maybe we could get through. It looks like with what you presented to us, we're 13 million short. So that 13 million has to come from somewhere, whether it's only doing 1,500 versus 3,000 or cutting other areas. So
If we don't do the 3,000, then we're gonna, correct me if I'm wrong, then that 1,500, say, is gonna be just chasing us down the road next year, right? It's just gonna be like, we're just gonna be behind again next year. If we don't just fix it now.
We would still be ahead of our cushion that we've established, but we wouldn't be able to address the inconsistency on the step
On the
increases
scale.
throughout.
So, but if we do the 3,000 now, then we fix the scale, and year after year, we're gonna be on target.
Correct.
If we don't fix the scale now, then we're gonna be behind again.
And it's kind of a complicated formula, but we've talked about this before, that whenever the state talks about an increase to the teacher scale, they may say, we want to increase it by X amount for every cell. Well, that's how we got into the inconsistent gaps that we currently have. So we would have to maintain the percentage that's established and apply the increase to the beginning level cell and then give appropriate increases for every step after that. So that would help us to maintain that balance. If we don't do that, then we could get out of balance real easily.
I mean, we have the money.
I mean, I'm looking, I know we got more things to look at with the budget, but this is my personal opinion. I would be leaning more towards to sticking with the 5,200 or 52,000 number than dropping it down. That's my opinion. I know we'll get to that once we get through the rest of the budget, but just wanted to kind of put that out there.
just from the HR standpoint, it's I think a real opportunity to honor what we've said to our employees, that, we really want to put our certified, all of our employees' salaries first, and this is a real opportunity to do that, and maybe even a chance to get a little bit ahead, depending on what the state does offer up. And we have tried for so long to fix the scales. It doesn't fix them perfectly, but it does get us a step closer to putting them where they need to be. There's no such thing as fixing it perfectly, right? But it does get us a little bit closer to that. So, selfishly, from the HR perspective, just thinking of the employee as a whole, it would be a great way to go if we can think about moving in that direction in some way for our employees. But certainly there is a lot to consider on the table and on the plate, a lot on the budget table tonight. But I think it would be a great direction for our employees if we can figure out how to get there. But to Dr. Price's point, I think more importantly in the future will also be considering how we keep from getting there again. When we do it by buckets of 1,000, like 3,000, 1,500, that's what gets us in trouble. When we don't apply that consistently across, that's what gets us back in the same situations. So know better, do better. So once we fix it, just trying to continue to not get in those situations again. So,
Ms. Miller, right now we're on basically line item 39, the certified salary, 7.6 million that Ms. Lashnick just said. And then the 2.8 million is now in parentheses. So that's in the negative
That's correct.
negative based off of revenue. But this revenue isn't calculating using any fund balance yet at this point, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Any other questions about the salary study recommendations?
I just want to, I don't know if it's not really a question, but I do like how we have the salary study recommendations listed within the Lexington One standards. And I say that because I think making sure our staff and teachers are taken care of should always be a Lexington One standard. So I just want to say I like how it's kind of blended in together with that.
Yes, sir. You'll see on the spreadsheet version that we'll go back to in just a moment, the color codes, you'll see where some of those recommendations precede a Lexington One standard. And it's because of the comment that you just made and other discussions that we've had that some new additions may be more important than sustaining established standards. So they're all important, but trying to put a place value on those, that's what we've tried to do with the order that you see on that spreadsheet. Okay?
I just want to add, I don't know who the driving force was behind the special ed items in this section, the special ed certified retention stipend, and the special ed instructional assistant salary grade increase. I want to applaud whoever the driving force was behind that. Those are critical and something that we've needed to do for quite some time, and I hope that can stay in the budget.
That was our salary committee.
There were 3 subcommittees within the salary study committee, one that focused on certified scales, one that focused on support scales, and one that focused on hard to fill positions. And that group identified special education as the area they wanted to focus on. And so any reference to a special education specific item came from that committee.
Hip, hip, hooray.
Yes, sir.
And what is that? What is the hourly rate now, and what the increase to? Do we know?
I don't know that I have the hourly rate. Do you have that, Mrs. Price?
It would vary depending on their experience. I'd have to pull it up really quick.
Yeah, it's based on number of years of experience.
It would be going from a grade 7 to a grade 8, so I could pull that up for you.
And you may recall that the special education certified retention stipend, there was a $1,000 stipend for year 1, a $2,000 stipend for year 2, and a $3,000 stipend for year 3 and beyond every year.
Madam Chair, so that would be my one question on the salary study committee recommendations. Are those all at 100% fill rate, or?
The adjustment is included in that $16 million adjustment, so these figures are the 100%, but that offsetting 4% is up in that $16 million adjustment at the top.
So, for example, grade 7 to a grade 8 on step 0 with no experience would go from $16.59 an hour to $17.63 an hour. That's with 0 experience, which not many people come in with 0 experience, but.
Okay, thank you. It's getting there.
That would be on the proposed scale too.
Okay. So moving on to our next category, this is where we're really going to need your thoughts. And so the discussion about the 50,000 versus 52,000 on the previous, 50,500 or 52,000, and the direction that you kind of established there that you're interested in us going towards, that will help us as we take this feedback and this discussion. We'll be bringing back first reading of the budget, then second reading of the budget, and as we bring these numbers back to you and having these discussions, your input will help guide us on what to bring back to you for each edition of the reading. So what we get to now is the would like to do's. These are things that don't necessarily exist right now, but have been identified either by SLT members, teachers, principals, as an item that we would like to consider for addition. So you see a number of different items here that are on the we don't do it now, but we would like to do it list. So we've done our best to try to prioritize these items, but we recognize that this is where we probably spent the most time is the other things, is kind of, you got to do it, so just throw it in there and we'll figure out where it falls. But these items, the dollar value and how much we go below the line of available dollars, this is where that comes into play. So this is where your input as far as things that we would definitely like to include in the budget. With regards to any particular priority order you may like for us to reconsider. Or there are some things where there's multiple positions attached to it, and maybe we don't do them all in 1 year, but maybe we phase them in over a few years to come. I'll give you an example. The high school principals have said their number one request would be to add an additional assistant principal to help them balance the load of what they have with administrative duties and instructional leadership expectations, spending time in classrooms. So that's 5 additional high school assistant principals. So one idea may be, well, we're going to phase it in 1 at a time over the next 5 years, or 2 at a time over the next 2.5 years, or so, something like that. So some of these carry additional FTEs, and you can see those on your spreadsheet. So you'll see in the FTE column for the would like to do colored category, you'll see many that say 1.0, but then you'll see others that have a 3.0, a 5.0, and a 9.0. So those have the ability to phase in rather than all at one time. So I'll open it up for discussion for anything that you'd like clarification on with this group of items.
So the middle school assistant principals, is that to like the Pillion plan this year with the 3rd assistant principal? Would that be making that at the rest of them?
Kind of, sort of. If you look at the very first item, Phase 2 Assistant Principal Pilot Program, that's what that one is. We've used a weighting formula looking at different specifics to determine which school would be the next in line to receive the pilot. And this year it would be, based on our data, it would be an elementary school that gets the additional AP because of their number of students and their workload. The middle school assistant principals, this is the number one request from the middle school principals. It's from the 3 middle schools who don't have a 3rd AP. So we have 3 right now that don't have a 3rd AP. They would like to have their 3rd AP.
Okay.
So kind of, sort of, but a different thing.
Okay. And board, as far as the elementary math coaches are concerned, I'm not sure exactly where this is going, Dr. Price, but I did have a math coach reach out to me last week who split between 2 elementary schools. And she just said that it was not benefiting the students as much as it could be if she could be at one school. So is this to make up for those split positions?
Yes, ma'am. And Ms. Gaskins is here that can support that. Right now we have 9 math coaches split amongst 18 schools. This would be to add 9 positions to make those whole. So we would have 1 math coach for every elementary school.
Dr. Price or Ms. Gaskins, could you all describe what an elementary math coach does and what that benefit is?
Absolutely. So they work very closely with teachers, both in planning for instruction, but also in classrooms, modeling instruction, giving teachers feedback, supporting the development of curriculum and assessment resources. So this spring, they are taking those new instructional materials and those new standards and developing the instructional materials so that when teachers leave in May, they already have what they need for next year. So it is school-based support. As Dr. Price said, we currently have 9. Our Title I schools use their Title I budgets to fund the other half currently. So by adding these math coaches, it would also give our Title I schools back a good portion of their budget, which would allow them to focus on other things. This was the elementary principal's number 1 request.
I have a comment and then a question. The very first item 50, I'm looking, I guess, at the spreadsheet, not really on the other thing, but the Phase 2 assistant, the pilot program, I think that's kind of a no-brainer we need to do. Just because Ms. Kiesler gave her presentation for what it did at Pillion Middle, it was outstanding, and I think that's a program that we definitely need to move forward with. But my question is I see a middle school and a high school athletic allocation. What is that for? Is that for coaches stipends or new positions or?
So that's Mr. Clark Cooper can speak to those specific items. First of all, with the middle school, where are you? 54. Middle school athletic allocation. So this would be to establish a budgetary allocation that would be provided by the district Right now, they're self-sustained. They don't have a budget that's provided by the district, and this would be to give them one. And for the, what was the other one you asked about?
The high school.
Okay, that would be an increase in theirs, but I'll refer to Mr. Cooper to add any further clarification.
Yes, sir, that you are correct. That is an allocation assigned by the district that we would like to start for our middle schools. They currently do not receive one, and one thing I think this district's very proud of is the growth in athletics that we've seen with adding teams. So with those adding teams comes added cost, and so it's to help middle schools offsetting that cost. And the same goes for the high school. They do receive an allocation from the district, and we would like to increase that to, again, offset costs by new sports and just the cost of doing business.
So would that 80,000 be spread across every middle school equally?
Yes, ma'am. That would be a $10,000 allocation per middle school.
And for high schools, it would be $5,000 for each.
We're asking to increase it by 5, yes.
All right, are you good?
No, I was just going to say one thing y'all probably learned about me is I'm a big supporter of the athletes and kind of like I am with the teachers. So I think with the athletic allocation, that's something we need to look at because I think a lot of not just what you learn in school for education, you learn a lot in athletics when it comes to, some of the things decisions you have to make in life and hard work. And so I think that's something that we definitely need to make sure we keep an eye on and always support.
And just a thought to throw out there as far as the high school allocations are concerned, increasing them by, it looks like 5,000 each. Should we consider more need in some areas for the money and maybe not make it equal dollar amounts? Does that make sense?
Yes, ma'am. That great thought, great thought process on that. And this is just an increase. So the schools do not have, the 5 high schools do not have the same allocation. There was an adjustment made to them of one of my last years at this school, and it did account for of schools that do have some higher need and don't maybe necessarily generate as much ticket sales and things of that nature. So there, your booster club involvement, yes, ma'am. So this is a flat rate for the increase, but I just wanted you to know that the value assigned to the schools is not the same. It is larger at the bigger schools. It also takes into account the revenue generating ability of those schools.
Does any of that money include? Can it be used to help students that maybe, want to try out for the dance team, say, at River Bluff, who a parent just sent me this week her portion of what she has to pay for her freshman next year, $3,500 to be on the dance team. Does any of this money help a parent, like, in need for those kinds of things, or is this just for coaches? And
this would be for the operation of the teams. So think, the required uniforms, equipment, things of that nature. Now, in terms of different sports fees that are associated with it, the fundraising opportunities, things of that nature, the better avenue would be for a parent that is in need is to reach out to that coach, athletic director, and that principal and look for a way that they could devise a way to assist that family. But this would be more for the operation of the sports teams.
Dr. Price.
Yes, sir.
I'm going to go back to the assistant principal line item. I understand we said with middle school, we have 3 FTEs because we basically have 3 middle schools that don't have that extra assistant principal. The high school assistant principal, 5 FTEs. We have 5 high schools. Do we have the same number of assistant principals now at each high school, or does that fluctuate based on enrollment?
Yes, sir, you are correct. The high schools with larger student enrollment have more assistant principal positions allocated to them.
But we think as a whole, every high school potentially needs that extra assistant principal to provide this classroom oversight and that type thing. Is that kind of the recommendation?
This was their request. This was straight from the high school principals. Their number one request was to increase the administrative support so that they could be appropriately responsive to classroom or school incidents, but also to free them up to also focus on the instructional leadership side of things that we're trying to establish and enforce and support from the district level as well, to make sure we're helping reach all of our achievement levels that we've set as goals. So I think they may have enough to keep the ship afloat, but if we want to get ahead of the game and really spend some time on the instructional leadership side of things, the extra position would afford them the opportunity to do so.
So help me with this, not being an educator. The instructional leadership piece, in layman's terms, what falls underneath that, I guess, that realm?
Classroom observations, instructional coaching. Ms. Gaskins, anything you want to add to that? Organizing, designing, and participating in professional learning.
Meeting with teams as they're planning for instruction. A lot of time also is invested in 504 and IEP meetings, which do contribute to the instruction of each student as well.
I think testing was another huge component that was named, that was taking up a pretty large portion of administrator time at the high school level.
Okay. Only other thing, kind of a larger line item, was middle school academic interventionists. I don't think we spoke to that.
Yes, sir.
What value does that bring to us also?
So Ms. Gaskins can speak to that as well, but we've got reading coaches, and we're asking for additional FTEs for math coaches at the elementary level. An academic interventionist would be to work with students who are struggling, and we have interventionists at the elementary level, and we're looking to add those at the middle school level. And I'll defer to Ms. Gaskins to speak more specifically.
That is correct. So above allocation right now, each middle school gets one FTE for academic intervention. Those were originally funded through ESSER, but we moved them to general fund over the last couple of years. So 4 of our 8 middle schools have about twice as many students who are scoring in the bottom 25th percentile in either math or ELA and need more sections than they're currently able to provide to serve those students in one or both of those areas. So at those 4 schools, we'd like to have another interventionist.
Mr. Cooper, could you tell us about the additional custodial services specialist and what that is exactly?
Yes, sir. That is a support staff position that works out of maintenance. We do have one custodial support staff specialist. This is the person that assists schools with the onboarding and training of all school-based custodial staff, custodians, assistant custodians, and housekeepers. In addition, they help facilitate anytime we have temporary staffing, bringing those groups in, or project-based work that is of the maintenance variety. Additionally, this person is responsible for a variety of inspections that have to be done annually: fire alarm, fire sprinkler, fire extinguisher, kitchen hoods, things of that nature. So it's quite a tall task in terms of providing that support to the schools with just one individual. So what we're asking for is a second person to be in assistance there. Another thing that is, I think, important for everyone to consider, when, with the kind of the fluid nature, the continuous hiring cycle we stay in with housekeeping and custodial staff, when you have a custodian or an assistant custodian that is out, either due to a resignation or a long-term leave absence, you're not just losing an employee, you're losing a leader of a team, and this individual has to step into those roles at times as well. So it is very much a boots on the ground position that's designed to provide support to school housekeeping teams.
Thank you.
I'm assuming, and no one wants to assume, but these, when you have like one FTE and then the request amount, that's salary and fringe, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I think I have another question. Actually, I know I do. Middle school behavior intervention, I see one FTE. Is that for one particular school, or will that person be shared across our middle schools?
We would prioritize that position at our 2 middle schools where we are in most need of behavior intervention based on discipline.
So that one position be prioritized across the 2 schools?
2 schools, yes.
Okay. So moving on to our last slide, these are other requests, and these are items that have come up as a suggestion or a mention that maybe didn't necessarily come from principals or SLT members, but nevertheless, we've received them in the form of an interest. And so we've included these items here on this last slide for other requests, and I'll be happy to answer any questions about these items that you may have.
The district vehicles, GPS, that's not buses, that's other.
District-owned vehicles,
District
service
vehicles.
trucks, and those kinds of things.
Okay. And the student fees, online payments, is that like when we register our children for school and we have to pay a service charge or whatever for using our cards?
Correct.
That kind of
When
thing?
when I believe it's for meal payments, that if you wanted to use the online version to pay meals,
It costs $2.60 every time you
correct,
pay your
that's to
child.
the parent, and if we.
I did that today, that's
if
why I know that.
If the district was going to assume that cost so that it doesn't, it's not passed on to the user, that's the price tag that would come with it.
Okay.
Did I explain that correctly, Mrs. Miller?
Madam Chair. Okay. Can we talk about the community eligibility provisions USDA program expansion? Can you just explain that for the public and for those of us that are not
Correct.
in that world?
Sure. So CEP, community eligibility provisions, this goes to provide meals for our students who may qualify for free or reduced lunch. And right now, they have to apply to receive those funds. And you may have seen an article in today's media that may be referencing a bill that's being discussed right now at the state level. But all of our students who qualify for free lunch get free lunch. And all of our students who qualify for reduced price meals get meals at a reduced price. There's been an inquiry whether or not we should consider paying for all meals for all students, whether you qualify for free or reduced lunch or not. And so if we were going to do that across the board, only a portion of that would be reimbursed to us from the USDA. Anything else, we would have to budget for to pay. And so the dollar amount that you see here is what that would cost the district every year to participate and make it free meals across the board. And Ms. Miller, if you would like to expand on that any.
I do want to make mention that there is federal guidelines, regulations, law that once a school is at 25% or higher of students that are directly certified for free and reduced meals, you are required to offer the CEP, and the state has a proviso last year that if you choose not to do so, you have to, as a board, adopt a policy or resolution actually each year stating why you would not be offering it community-wide. And so you could put in there that it's a financial hardship or whatever reason behind why you would not be offering it. And as Dr. Price said, any student that does meet the qualifications, all the family has to do is apply, and they will receive their meal for free or reduced depending on their category. And so certainly want to make sure the children are fed. Those that qualify certainly will receive a meal for free.
But to be clear, if a child needs a meal, we've never turned a child away.
No, you're not allowed to.
Okay.
Ms. Miller, has the CEP program changed at all from last year? Because I know it came before the board last year, and we chose not to move forward with it. So has it changed?
It has not changed again, but you are correct. Last year was the first year that the board had to adopt a resolution. Last year was the year that they changed from the 40% category of directly certified down to the 25%. So kind of to put that in perspective, the families that are in that 25%, we're going to get reimbursed for that. And then depending on participation, you could get a little bit more reimbursement, but most likely the district would have to pick up probably at least 60% of the expense. The families would not be charged for those meals, but the district would be paying for those.
So my understanding I think last year that impact to the district would have potentially been about $4 million. So now that impact hasn't changed that much except the percentage. So that impact would be 2.5 versus $4 million that was presented to the board last year.
That's correct. And this number is fluid. These were off of the numbers that were available at the time. They actually file it officially with the state this month. So they're pulling reports and getting ready to file that. So this number will change. This is not the final number. And so it will change. 7 meals.
I think I may be jumping ahead. Tell me if I am. But we're in the negative by 13, almost 14 million. What are the options? Maybe moving to the next slide of
Yeah, we're coming
how.
up to that next.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. Any other questions about this slide?
Yeah, just one last question. GPS monitoring for district vehicles what's the purpose behind knowing exactly where each district vehicle is? Is that a safety thing or mileage, how many miles per hour it's traveling, or?
It's for location services, for monitoring, for efficiency, those kinds of things. And in the event that someone is unresponsive, we know where the vehicle is, so it could be a variety of things.
And Mr. Rice, I asked several months ago that we look into the feasibility of adding that to our fleet. Knowing where our vehicles are at all times.
Oh, is there more to the story? Is there? No. Okay. Let's go.
Okay. Now, going back to the spreadsheet. So if you see in the second column from the right, the cumulative amount value. So as Ms. Miller described earlier, she calculated our available additional funds based on projection right now. And then the additional cost savings that we identified. You're starting with a total amount of $14.679 million. So as each item is applied to that budget, am I turning my head too much? Okay. Okay. All right. So I got a laser? Okay. All right. Thank you. Have a pointer. All right. So you'll see that this number right here, our starting amount that's available for us for new expenses is 14.67. As you go down, as each item is applied to the budget that we account for, you see that this number decreases by the proposed amount, the estimated amount cost for each of these items. So as you scroll down, you see that the more items we add to the list, the more available dollars decrease. So if you scroll down to the next page, you see that those items, the first group were the state and federal mandates. We've got our fixed cost increases here, the cost of doing business. We get into our Lexington 1 standards, and then you see these numbers in parentheses. That's where we have exhausted all of our available funds, and now we have to look at what do we do now if we want to do anything below that line. So you see in this item, to get for just the first item for the certified salary scale, that would be 2.8 million beyond the additional revenue that we are anticipating. So if you get down to the end of the proposed recommendations by the salary committee, that would be 8 million beyond, okay? So, and as you can imagine, the further you go down the list, the higher this number over here becomes. And so then you ask the question, well, where do we get those funds from? So there's a couple of different ways that we consider. One is a millage increase, and a couple of board members have made it very clear what they will and will not approve moving forward. So that's one thing. The other thing is to consider a fund balance. And for the past few years, we've had a line item in our budget that allocated fund balance to account and to pay for certain things that were being requested in order to keep us flush. And Mrs. Miller and her team have worked really hard to try to identify why was that dollar amount there but not being touched, and then we were contributing to the fund balance each year. So from all of the work that Dr. Postlethwaite and the SLT team did last year with a zero-based budget effort into this year and streamlining and cleaning up our HR positions, we feel like we've been able to account for all of that. And so now the feeling is that anything that says we'll have to use fund balance to pay for anything on this list, we will. And so one train of thought is that we've got available fund balance that is beyond our minimum requirement for what we must maintain. So we could say that as a board that we're going to approve X number of dollars to approve for next year's budget so that we can include the items that fall below this line right here. So that's the other venue. One option is to consider a millage increase. The other is to consider using fund balance for a year to pay for those things to see where we all flush out. The next year we could have an even more accurate picture of how much of that allocated fund balance did we use. And then we make decisions at that point whether to continue to use fund balance and how long could we do that before we exhausted all of our available unassigned fund balance dollars we have. And when do we need to consider a millage increase in the future? None of those decisions have to be made tonight, okay? This is all a first glance based off of early projections about the first set of numbers that we've received from the House. So as we move forward, things that we'll need to be considering as we move forward with first reading, second reading, and third reading are the items that you as a board would like to include below this item right here. And if you could scroll to the next page, if there's anything on here that you want to move around on the priority list to make sure it gets included.
Dr. Price, quick question. So these are all reoccurring expenses, correct? So an option, if we use the fund balance, is it'll cover us for a year, and the thought is we'll have more of a feel after the year of how much fund balance we would really have to use.
Correct.
And then have a better feel for
how
potential.
long we can do that and sustain it with fund balance available dollars that have not been assigned.
Got it.
Right, because I was just doing a little math over here. And so if we're anticipating $390 million-ish in revenue this year, but we then spend almost 14 in fund balance, then next year we would need revenue of $404 million. Why are you, no.
I guess I'm looking at it differently.
Okay.
Because the fund balance will still accumulate because we have to keep a certain amount in it, correct?
Won't be accumulating, it would just be maintaining. And each year you have to maintain a higher amount as your budget increases to maintain that 16.67%.
So let's say, for example, we've got our minimum amount that we're required by policy to keep in our fund balance. Then we have additional money in our fund balance that's in excess of the minimum amount. Let's say it's about $16 million of excess available dollars that are not assigned. So if we decided to say we were going to cover $8 million worth of these items using fund balance, we could do that for 2 years. And then either those things would have to cease or we'd have to find another way to fund those.
But would it be true that with that additional $8 million, if we budget that, then we would have to keep more in fund balance the next year?
Correct.
increase, you would have to increase to maintain that 16.67%.
So really, then we wouldn't, with that scenario, have 8 million the next year. We'd have less than that the next year.
Correct. We'd have to account for the percentage of our operating budget to make sure that's the new minimum in our fund balance.
Okay.
So a few board meetings ago, we saw a chart on fund balance and over the last 5 years, how much it increased. And can't remember the exact number, but I think over the course of 5 or 6 years, it averaged increasing by $8.5, maybe $9 million each year. Do we think we have changed something as far as our zero-based budget or our budgeting, our expenditures, where that increase won't happen anymore? Because historically, I guess we're 8 to 9 million under par, so to speak, at the end of each fiscal year.
Yes, sir. That was part of Mrs. Miller's presentation at the last board meeting with those slides she added to the superintendent's report. And it's a combination of maybe underestimating our revenues, overestimating our expenses, and then shoring up some of our position control numbers. And so when she talked about 100% funding versus actual funding, and so she's worked really hard to try to identify precisely projected revenues, projected expenses. That's why you see so many individual line items in this presentation, as we're trying to account for every dollar and apply that to last year's zero-based efforts that basically cleaned up a lot of the cushion to make sure we're using every available dollar. So that's why we're able to do a lot of the things before we start getting into the negative.
Okay, and so one other thought, maybe Ms. Miller will have to pull out her crystal ball, but obviously this is a reassessment year for Lexington County. So is there any way of us looking at our crystal ball and knowing, will the county be reassessed higher? Will it be reassessed lower, or will it remain the same?
That's a great question. In a reassessment year, the goal when you're doing the rollback millage calculation is to keep your tax revenue at the same amount. So you're not actually going to receive an increase. The increase you're going to receive is on your current year growth. But the rollback of the millage technically should be generating the same amount of revenue, and that's why you're rolling it back, because you have increased the value of the property. And if you continue to charge the higher millage, it would be more revenue. That's why you roll it back, so it stays the same.
With this year and the numbers that we have in local revenue and state revenue, about an extra, I guess, $8.8 million. Are we not going to see that? Are we thinking we won't see that trend next year? Just 1 year we had a local revenue increase?
I think we've been tightening that budget projection each year. It's about half of what the change was last year, and so we've brought that down even further. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that we have it 100% correct right now. It could vary. It depends on the local revenue and the assessed values and collection rates and all of those factors. But we do believe we've gotten that in a lot tighter, and so we may not have that flexibility in the future where we're adding.
And that's the same with the projected for 25-26 of the 13 million?
That's correct. Up one item as you're thinking about the salary increase. While there's no increase to the health insurance to the district this year, there is going to be an increase proposed right now to the employees. So each employee's health insurance premium should go up $37.76. And I believe that's just if it was a single employee. That doesn't include the family coverage and what that amount is. But just for a single employee, that means their paycheck is actually going to go down $441 for the year. So even if we were to do a $1,500 increase, just remember about $440 is going to have to come off of that to see what they're actually receiving. So keep that in mind.
Dr. Price, another quick question about the fund balance. In planning and projecting, I think it's important to look beyond just 1 year, 2 year, even 3 years. So is the expectation that we'd potentially use fund balance for 1, maybe 2 years, but at some point you'll have to start taking pretty regular increases to millage to cover your expenses.
I believe so, depending on, it also depends on if we want to maintain that cushion in the salary scale that we're going to establish with it. That's a big part. Remind me again of what the difference in the amount was 3.1 million. So after a while, we've got to make sure we plan accordingly to be able to sustain that in the future. So I believe our fund balance right now for unassigned amounts will allow us to do this for several years, and I think it would be a positive move in our community to be able to rely on fund balance to carry this load as we get started, to get us going along that path before just automatically jumping into a millage increase. So I think it would be a good place to start. We've got the cushion that will allow us to do that in fund balance, so it would be a good place for us to start.
And are you saying that if we wanted to pull 13.88, we could?
I don't know that I'm necessarily saying
that
we want to pull all 13.8 million. But Ms. Miller, I believe, has a number available of the unassigned amount that exceeds our threshold of minimum.
Okay.
So with an approximate $400 million budget, we would have to maintain these approximately $67 million in unassigned. Then you have your assigned amounts that the board has already assigned of $7.5 million. You usually have about 1.2 in another category that relates to financial reporting. And so that's going to leave us with probably close to $38 million in unassigned that could be used. But again, that is one-time money.
Right.
So once you spend out of that, it doesn't get replenished.
So if you increase your assigned dollar amount, that total available amount will go down that amount every year unless we are contributing back to it. So it will only last for so long.
So the total projected revenue for 25-26 is 390, 373. And our total budget, we're going off of 346, is that right? Or 376?
Combination of that.
Okay.
And nobody laugh at me, but I can't do any math in my head, so I'm going to make sure I don't just throw a number out there. But if you take what the negative is plus your 390, right now it's that 404 math that Ms. Henson did in her head earlier.
Okay. Yeah. What was that? 404?
Or 262, 188. That's if you include everything that's on the needs list.
Okay, and at that number, our minimum would be what?
For the fund balance, 16.67% times that, so that would be, oh gosh, I did it wrong because of my decimal. 67,390, $507 as the required minimum fund balance.
So strategically, I'm still thinking long range. We may want to get a feel for how we want to dovetail into a millage at some point in millage increase. I'm imagining that we would want that to be a gradual thing rather than a big bang once we spend everything. So just, food for thought down the road, and I'm sure the timing will adjust depending on after this first year we kind of see how much we eat into fund balance, but just something to hang on to.
I agree with that. I think that's a really good suggestion. And again, from all the efforts that Mrs. Miller and her team have done to really whittle this down to precise numbers, the fund balance that we have accumulated gives us the ability to move forward with however many of these requests beyond our projected dollars, to be able to sustain that until we get an even better idea of how accurate our efforts have gotten us to. So it gives us the ability to do that, and once we have a really good idea about any other tweaks that we need to make, then we can tackle a millage increase incrementally rather than all at once.
So what do y'all need from us now?
I think right now what we need from you guys is some direction to think about this and give us some direction about the items that, if you could go back one page. So remember, right here, we're well accounted for. Anything below that is going to require an assigned value of fund balance at some point that we'll have to take a vote on. And so these are the things that I would ask for you to spend some time on between now and first reading, and be ready to give us some direction about things you would like to see included as we move towards a final budget for vote. Again, you don't have to say those things now. I think we've gotten a good direction as far as certified salaries that we want to go, but I've heard some individual members advocate for some items on the list, but collectively we'll have to get to a place where everyone feels good about all of those things. So be thinking about that between now and the first reading. And the more direction we can get collectively from the board, the more we can bring you a very precise proposal.
And I totaled up the would like to do, not all of them, but kind of looked at the categories. For FTE, assistant principals, we're looking at $980,000 plus, a little over that. In the academic category, it's $1.2 million. The behavior category, it's $313,000, and then athletics is $105,000. So I feel like even if we went with all of those would like to do's, we're still prioritizing our principals, our academics. So I just feel like it falls perfectly in line with our strategic plan supporting learning, and just wanted to throw that out there.
So with that said, I'll bring your attention to a couple of special requests. And so if you'll look at item number, go back one page, item number 49, go forward one page. Number 49, elementary academic interventionists, and then move forward one page to item number 53. That's the middle school academic interventionists. So later on in your agenda, you'll see a consideration to take action on one item, and it's for these specific positions. Those are 4.5 FTEs. And those are interventionist positions, and Ms. Gaskins can speak more precisely to this, but a lot of these positions to move forward will probably come from within our own ranks. And if we're going to find the best candidates for those specific positions, then the timeliness of advertising for those is critical. And so there's a special request later on is to use fund balance as a backup to go ahead and approve those positions so we can move forward with advertising in case they don't make it into the budget that's voted on later in June. So you will see a specific request for that later on in your agenda. And Mrs. Gaskins, is there anything more about that description that you'd like to provide?
You've done a wonderful job, Dr. Price. So that is because of a slight change in our formula for elementary academic intervention. That's an addition of 1.5 interventionists at the elementary level and the 4 middle school academic interventionists that we talked about earlier. And because those positions directly impact students on a daily basis, we know that some of our best teachers may be interested in those positions and would leave a hole in a classroom to backfill also. So we're thinking about not just hiring for this one position, but the vacancies that it could create and having time to fill those as well.
And I just would echo that. I think you guys referred to that a little bit earlier in the conversation, but I think you probably see many positions up here, and I think, Ms. Simpson, you asked about that earlier with contracts. So as contracts go out on April the 25th, and they are due back on May the 10th, that's one of the things Ms. Gaskins is referring to. We don't like for people to steal from one another within our district, and we certainly want to have our schools with the best employees possible, and we want them to have the opportunity to get the best from other places as well, throughout the state, throughout the country, and we want to give them the opportunity to do that before contracts go out here within the state and beyond. And if we get too close to that window, we lose that opportunity.
So how does that even apply to things like, I think there was the math coaches, like the 9 positions there. I mean, I would assume those would be classroom teachers who would become these coaches, and then we have to hire 9 classroom teachers.
It's all going to be a snowball. So,
but if our budget isn't approved until June.
For our ask tonight, we tried to prioritize those that do meet daily with students, but certainly the others have the same snowball effect.
Madam Chair, I'm going to have a hard time approving some positions on the bottom of the budget if we're not prioritizing the conversation about what we're going to pay our teachers and the contracts. So I'm not sure where that leads us with the action items, but I personally am going to have a really hard time voting yes on things towards the bottom of the priority list the way that I'm seeing it if we're not voting on this $52,000 minimum for our teachers, making sure our certified teachers know what they're going to be paid. So that's kind of where I stand.
Dr. Price, where does the $52,000 starting salary put us in line with other districts in the area?
We don't know.
Well,
have
we don't
no
know
idea.
what they're going to change theirs to next year. I would say that we're relatively competitive currently, but who knows what the new year may bring. And I know Mrs. Price has done some salary comparisons. I don't know if you have those numbers available.
yeah, and, you know, we always try to be very proactive, and I think in previous years, last year was a good example of that. We were very proactive and one of the first ones to kind of get our budget out there, and therefore our number was out there early, and then everyone kind of topped us out, right? So, and I think that happens sometimes. There's a good thing about being early, and sometimes not a good thing about being early. We don't know what others are thinking, and people aren't as open sometimes to share that because everybody wants to have their number on top, and sometimes when you share that, it's not as easy to compete. So everybody.
It is difficult, but I do think that should be one of our top priorities.
It absolutely should. Yes.
The reason for the special request is because of the timeliness of it, whereas those other things we just need to have resolved by the time the new year begins. This is one of those items that timeliness
we
would
can't
help
wait
us.
till June 30th, July 1 to start moving forward because all the teachers that are looking for jobs have probably found them by then.
Mm-hmm.
And in regards to Ms. Gaskin's intervention, so a lot of the numbers that you saw at the top were by formula items, and that's the original items I brought to you. And I don't know if you want to speak to it. They've just made kind of a tweak in formula, which is why their increase is there for the intervention numbers. I don't know if you want to speak to why. So that's why they're kind of asking for that difference in increase in those intervention positions, and to try to kind of improve that piece.
Yes, and it's also why the elementary academic intervention is prioritized above middle school. And I don't want my middle school friends in the room to get upset with me, but we have well-established intervention program at the elementary level, and we want to maintain the level of service that we've been able to provide students, and also move in the direction of a more early intensive intervention program, which you heard a school talk about Meadow Glen earlier in the year when they came to do their presentation, while still providing some services to students in 4th and 5th grade too. And so we've looked closely at our elementary formula to see what's more realistic in terms of being able to do that. And so also right now, we're making decisions about what goes in, like a Title I plan and budget. Some of our Title I schools have also intervention FTE in those budgets. And so it would just be helpful not to completely kind of disrupt that system we have in place right now in elementary by not knowing the formula we're going to have next year. So that's why that's a priority for a decision.
Okay, Mrs. Miller has talked a little bit about the value of a meal, but we have one more slide that if you'd like to wrap this piece up.
Sure, we can wrap this up. I do want to make sure everybody understands this is prior to the rollback millage. So this is where we were with the 325.86 number of mills. We are allowed to increase that 5.33%. That's a calculation taking the consumer price index times inflation. So that would bring us to, we could add 17.37 mills. Value of a mill with the numbers available at the time I did this slide was $396,950. Of course, that amount's going to fluctuate along with the number of mills. But just to give you an idea of when we're looking at the number of mills and what the revenue can bring, 17.37 mills would get you right about $6.9 million currently. So that's what we are allowed to charge in 1 year for the increase for this year, but you are also allowed to look back 3 years, which is different than the rollback. This is the look back that you get to do every year. You can look back 3 years and pick up that millage that you did not increase in the prior year. So in a given year, you could increase 81.58. I'm not promoting that. I'm just letting you know the calculation.
And just reiterating with the rollback this year. So currently, we have 325.86 mills is what we charge. And the value of a mill is $396,950. So the 325 times the 396 is our local revenue because of millage, correct?
Taking into consideration collection rates, yes.
Collection. People not paying taxes, right? Okay, so what happens with the rollback is the value of the mill increases. So the number, our millage rate decreases, but those multiplied together still give us the same dollar amount. So we would say, I'm totally throwing a number out there, like next year our millage rate could be 315.
That's correct.
But we would still get the same amount.
That's correct.
Just a general question. Just thinking about our general community and taxpayers out there. So if they roll it back and it goes from, say, 325 to 315, are people paying any less in taxes? They're paying the exact same amount they would have paid the previous year. Okay, I just want to make sure.
Madam Chair, and these are operating mills. We're not talking about the 8%, correct?
Correct. This is operating millage. It is not your debt service millage.
I do have one more in me, but it's not related to this. It's related back to, I'm thinking about the elementary interventionists and the middle school interventionists. We mentioned we'd potentially like to be able to get contracts out early. And I know we'd like to be able to give them an idea of what that contract is going to be. A salary. And we talked about a lot of teachers wanting to possibly swap over to be an interventionist or a math coach if we proceeded with that. So if a teacher committed to a contract, they cannot swap over to applying to be an interventionist later if those positions come out later. Is that correct or incorrect?
Ms. Price, you want to explain the transfer process and the timelines that are established?
So the problem is we have to close the internal transfer portal down a little bit, because what happens if we don't do that is if we continue to allow that to happen, unfortunately, you can kind of steal from your neighbor, and that puts some of our internal schools at a disadvantage. So if I'm school A and I have a math coach or fill in the blank, an assistant principal pick a position, right? And if it's a promotion, that's a little bit different. But if I have a math coach position or even another just teaching position that comes open, and I'm transferring over to that school, and we just continue to allow that to happen all throughout the summer, then sometimes what we get are just these endless snowballs that happen all summer long. And then sometimes it puts some of our most disadvantaged schools or rural schools at really tough positions. So we have to kind of draw that line at some point and say, this is our internal transfer deadline. You can't go past this point. And that's hard because some of those positions that we really covet sometimes come available after those points. But if we don't do that, it really puts some of our schools at a disadvantage for being able to hire. And so we made that decision. Our administrators came together and made that decision as a whole. We pick a deadline, and they agree to stick to it, to treat each other with kindness and fairness to do that. So we've agreed to do that as a district, to say we're going to treat each other fairly. This is going to be the internal transfer deadline, and we're not going to kind of take from each other after that deadline.
So what is that deadline? I'm sorry.
This year, I think it's the 28th. I have to look at my calendar to make sure I have that right. 30th. Thank you.
Of April.
Yes, April. Yes.
So if we were to approve these positions tonight, that would give people enough time for that transfer versus if we were not to do it. Is that what I'm hearing?
Correct. Yes.
Excuse me, and if I might just add to this conversation, the complicating factor is after May 10th, we can't hire from other districts in South Carolina.
Correct.
Because those teachers are contract bound. So whatever the vacancy fulfillment process has to conclude by May 10th as well. So it really creates a lot of pressure. And I think there's a way for you to deal with this tonight and still, on April 22nd, take the action that would make you more comfortable and would also allow, if you know you want to offer a salary schedule that accomplishes what the Salary Study Committee has recommended, you could approve that on April 22nd because you know you have fund balance, you're going to be safe. And then that would allow the new salary schedule to go out with contracts. It's just something to think about. But you could take care of the item that's on the agenda tonight and then give yourself some reassurance on the 22nd that all of our other employees have not been left out of the early prioritization.
Can I throw one thing out in left field?
Mm-hmm.
Whenever we had sorry, it'll be quick. The amazing lady, I forget her name, that came from, was it Rock Hill or Fort Mill? Fort Mill. And she talks about that position that they have in their district where it was in-house. They handled all of the extra, facility rentals. Thank you. Is it too late to consider that for this year, or?
Well, the budget hasn't been finalized yet. I know that Mr. Cooper and his team were doing some work on that to bring some information that they've discovered later on. I don't know that it was necessarily to be considered because of the timeliness of this, but the budget hasn't been finalized up to this point. So if that's something that the board would like to add, we can do some research on that. Correct me if I'm wrong, but because of the amount of fees that they assess,
the position
they were
paid
able
for
to
itself.
pay for it. It was a budget neutral position.
Exactly. That's my point in bringing it up, because it's not going to cost us any more money, but I think it's something that we really, really, really need ASAP, especially with, some of the new coaches that we have in the district. We really have this opportunity to get this thing
I think
going.
what Mr. Cooper was going to do was to run some analysis of what we're taking in for our facility rentals, take a look at the current fees that we assess, and any changes of that nature would have to be brought back to the board And so we would have to use that to determine whether or not the new fee structure might be able to pay for a self-sustaining position.
I'm a huge proponent to try to get that on this.
A thought, it's possible that we can pass a budget and then later amend a budget. So even if it's not fast enough, we have that capability.
Yeah, a position like that wouldn't be an annual certified contract type of position, so it would give us the flexibility to add it at any point if we can, especially if we can justify that it's budget neutral.
And we have come back and amended the budget in the past. Yeah, last year.
Well, this brings us to discussion, but I think we've been doing that all along.
I think we have, Dr.
And
Price.
I just want to take the opportunity to thank Ms. Miller, her finance team. They have put in a lot of hours and a lot of research and a lot of work to try to identify projected cost value for every item that you've seen. In addition to that, the SLT team members have been working to listen to the folks around them to be able to identify the needs that have been listed and presented here tonight. So this has truly been a team effort, but also one that lasts for quite some time. Earlier, Mrs. Miller gave a draft version of what a budget calendar would look like. And I believe it is a year-long process in order to do it. And to Mrs. Miller's credit, I believe this is the third different type of budget that she has tackled in 3 consecutive years. So she and her team have done some incredible heavy lifting to bring the numbers and the projections that you have here tonight. So I wanted to make sure we recognize them and show appreciation for them and our SLT members for all the work that has gone into this process, as well as other members of our leadership team who've really been trying to dig down and identify the true needs in order for Lexington One to continue to be an excellent school district. So thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you, Dr. Price. Okay. Whew, board. This concludes the budget workshop. So now do I hear a motion to enter executive session?
Madam Chair, I move to enter executive session to discuss employment recommendations and updates.
Thank you, Ms. Shealy. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. All right, we will now enter executive session. Oh, wait, no. Do I have all those in favor? Any opposed? All right, now we will enter into executive session. Okay. Do I hear a motion to conclude executive session and return to open session?
Madam Chair, I move we conclude executive session and return to general session.
Thank you, Ms. Shealy. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And the motion carries. All right. Do I hear a motion to approve 13 certified staff recommendations for the 2025-2026 school year?
Madam Chair, I move we approve 13 certified staff recommendations for the 2025-2026 school year.
Thank you, Ms. Shealy. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Well, any discussion? Ms. Price, how are we looking with filling these positions for 25-26?
Well, we always are looking for more. So as great as it looks with the ones that we just brought on board, we would love to have more. So we encourage people to visit the site and apply. So.
All right, board, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And the motion carries. Earlier this evening, we heard during the workshop from Dr. Price, if you think back to line items 49 and 53, and we understand there's a need to begin the hiring process for 25-26 school year specialized positions. So do I hear a motion to assign fund balance for 5.5 academic intervention FTEs as a supplemental contingency to the 25-26 general fund operating budget?
Madam Chair, I move to assign fund balance for 5.5 academic intervention FTEs as a supplemental contingency to the 2025-2026 general fund operating budget.
Thank you, Ms. Shealy. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Is there any discussion?
Can we put a financial number to that instead of a FTE number?
I think those 3 line items.
Because the motion is for a number of FTEs. The motion is not for an amount of money.
So I added up the amount that was presented to us. It would be $477,471.
Again, that's an
But that's an
estimate
estimate.
based on salary, experience, and years. So just keep that in mind with tying it to an exact dollar amount.
Can we do it like we do other things where it's up to?
Would it be safe to say up to 500,000? I don't know if that would be.
Well, it's hard to tell.
It would be how many years of experience of those teachers that may be taking that position, which could be at the higher end of the salary scale.
And so if you go to hire someone and it's $501,000, then would we have to wait until after our April meeting to bring it back to the board for another approval?
Right, and we don't want to cripple what we're being asked to do here. So if we put a dollar amount limitation on it and the people that we hire exceed that amount, then they're not able to go ahead and hire these folks, and the whole point of this is pointless.
Yeah, but I understand what Ms. Lasnick is saying. If we're going to vote on using fund balance, we need to have some type of money in, like an amount in mind instead of just saying an FTE.
Could we add an approximate? Can we use that kind of verbiage? Amend the motion to add an approximate $500,000.
I just don't think you can assign fund balance on an FTE, because then how would we account for that in unassigned funds or assigned funds? That's why I'm struggling. Because how will we know if when we're looking at this budget and we're saying, okay, our current fund balance, I'm making this up, is $100. And we're saying we're going to assign 5 FTEs. Well, what if those 5 FTEs exhaust our fund balance? I know that's a very not realistic look at this, but how do we then come back next time when we're looking at our budget? We don't know what we have assigned because we're just leaving it up in the air at 5 FTEs.
So what we could do is assign up to a certain dollar amount and then monitor that as we fill these positions. And if we get to a point where we've exhausted those funds and we don't have enough to fill the last position, then we could come back and ask for an additional allocation.
So, Madam Chair, I'd like to amend my motion.
Okay.
I'd like to amend my motion to state I'd like to assign fund balance for 5.5 academic intervention FTEs up to a value of $500,000 as a supplemental contingency to the 2025-2026 general fund operating budget.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Ms. Shealy. Thank you, Mr. Anderson. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And the motion carries. We do not have any other action items for tonight. I'll just state that our regular board meeting for the month of April will be held on Tuesday, April 22nd, and we will see you all then. So enjoy your spring break. Do I hear a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Madam Chair, before we adjourn, I just want everyone to know, had Dr. Postlewaite not called me today to tell me that tonight's meeting wasn't an April Fool's joke, I may have not been here. That's the only April Fool's joke I've pulled all day. I've done very good. With that, I move that we adjourn.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. All those in favor? Oh, do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, meeting adjourned.